My mother-in-law moved into my home on a Tuesday, and by Saturday, she had rearranged my kitchen. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. She was 63, recently widowed, and my husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was then, had asked me with tears in his eyes if she could stay with us for a few months while she figured things out. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I loved him, and I thought that's what you do when someone you love is hurting. That was 14 months before the night she called me a guest in my own house. Let me back up a little, because if I just tell you what happened that night, you'll think I'm exaggerating. You'll think no one would actually say something like that. And I need you to understand that I am not exaggerating, and people absolutely will say something like that, especially when they've been slowly, quietly taught that they can. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 29 years old, I had worked since I was 19, and I had bought that house myself. Not with help. Not with a cosigner. Myself. 3 years of eating sandwiches for lunch, skipping vacations, driving a car that made a sound I chose to ignore. I closed on that house 11 months before I met my husband, and when we got married 2 years later, it became our home. His name went on the mortgage. I trusted him that much. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law, had lived her whole adult life in the same small town in Ohio where my husband grew up. When his father passed away from a sudden heart attack last spring, she was alone for the first time in 40 years. My husband is an only child. There was no one else to step in, so we became the plan. I want to be fair. In the beginning, she was fine. She cooked sometimes, which I appreciated. She kept her room neat. She watched her shows at a reasonable volume. I was patient. I reminded myself that grief makes people different, that she was still finding her footing, that it would get easier. But there were small things. Little things I noticed and filed away because they didn't seem worth a fight. She would introduce me to her friends on the phone as my son's wife, never by my name. She would comment on how I loaded the dishwasher, how I folded towels, how I seasoned chicken. She asked my husband once, while I was standing right there, whether I knew how to make a proper Sunday roast. Not whether we made a proper Sunday roast, whether I knew how. My husband laughed it off. She's old school, he'd say. She doesn't mean anything by it. I believed him. For a long time, I believed him. Then she stopped paying for anything. This part is important, and I want to explain it clearly because I know it's the part that will make some of you ask the same question I eventually had to ask myself. How did you let it go on so long? When she first moved in, the agreement, loose as it was that she would contribute something to the household. She had a pension. Small, but real, around $1,400 a month. She had my father-in-law's life insurance payout sitting in a savings account. She was not destitute. She was not helpless. She was a woman in her 60s with money in the bank who had come to live in someone else's house. For the first 2 months, she handed my husband $300 at the start of each month. He put it toward groceries and utilities. Not a lot, but the gesture mattered to me. It said we're in this together. Then 1 month she didn't. My husband said she'd had some unexpected expenses. A car repair, I think. Fine. I let it go. Then it was 2 months, then 3. I tried to bring it up once, gently. I said something like, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about household costs. My mother-in-law looked at my husband. Just looked at him, like I hadn't spoken. And he said, we'll figure it out. It's fine. It was not fine. Our grocery bill had gone up significantly. Our water bill, our electric bill. I was the one who paid most of it. I work in healthcare administration. Good job, decent salary, but not endless. My husband works in IT. We were comfortable together. With her added to the equation, and with the contributions stopping, I started to feel a slow, steady pressure that I didn't talk about because I didn't want to seem unkind. Looking back, that silence was a mistake. The silence taught everyone that I would absorb it. The night everything changed was in October. My sister and her husband had driven 4 hours to visit for the weekend. It was the first time I'd seen her in 6 months. We'd planned a dinner at home. I cooked, spent most of Saturday afternoon on it. Lasagna, garlic bread, a salad my sister specifically loved. It was supposed to be easy and warm and ours. My mother-in-law was there, of course. At first it was fine. She was polite to my sister, asked about her kids, made conversation. My husband was in a good mood. I let myself relax a little. Then my sister's husband mentioned something about the house. He said it was beautiful, asked how long we'd had it. I said I bought it before my husband and I got together, that it had been mine for about 5 years now. My mother-in-law looked up from her plate. "Well," she said, very calmly, "you've certainly made yourself comfortable here." I stopped. My fork was halfway to my mouth and I stopped. I looked at her. I thought surely I'd misheard. Surely that sentence didn't mean what it sounded like. My sister glanced at me, what it sounded like. My sister glanced at me. "This is my home," I said. I kept my voice even. I own it. I've owned it for 5 years. My mother-in-law set down her napkin. "I just mean," she said, and the pause she put before just was doing a lot of work, that some people come into a family and they treat everything like it belongs to them. The table went quiet. I looked at my husband. I looked directly at him and I waited for him to say something. He picked up his glass of water. He took a slow sip. And then he said, very quietly, "Let's not make this a whole thing." To me. He said that to me. My sister made a sound across the table. Not a word, just a sound. Her husband studied the garlic bread like it contained the answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. I put my fork down. I excused myself. I went to the bathroom and I stood at the sink with the water running and I looked at my own face in the mirror for a long time. I had been quiet in that house for 14 months. I had absorbed comment after comment, dismissal after dismissal, month after month of costs I hadn't agreed to carry alone. I had made dinner for everyone and sat at my own table and been told, in front of my own family, by a woman living in my house for free, that I was the one who didn't belong, and my husband had told me not to make it a thing. I walked back out to that table and I sat down and I finished dinner. I smiled when it was appropriate. I cleared the plates. I said goodnight when my sister and her husband went to the guest room. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to my husband, and I thought about every month I had not said the thing I needed to say. Every time I told myself it wasn't worth the conflict. Every time I protected his feelings over my own dignity. By morning, I had made some decisions. I did not yell. I did not cry in front of anyone. I did not make a scene. I am telling you this because I think people expect that when a woman finally reaches her limit, it looks dramatic. It didn't. It looked like me, sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a very clear head. My husband came downstairs first. I told him I needed to talk. He sat down, looking a little wary. He'd known the night before that something had shifted, I think. Or maybe he'd hoped I'd just absorb it again. I told him what his mother had said had been unacceptable. I told him that his response had been more unacceptable. I told him that I had been covering the majority of household expenses for months, with no acknowledgement and no change. I told him that I needed things to be different, and that I needed to hear, clearly and directly, that he understood why. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's going through a hard time." "I know she is," I said. "That doesn't give her the right to talk to me like that in my own home." She didn't mean it as an attack. She told me I was making myself comfortable in a home I own, in front of my sister, and you told me not to make it a thing. He rubbed his face. He said it was complicated. He said family was complicated. He said his mother was still grieving and she wasn't herself, and he needed me to be patient. I asked him how much longer. I asked him what the timeline was. I asked him whether there had ever been a plan, or whether the plan was simply for me to keep waiting indefinitely without ever being allowed to say that it was hard. He didn't answer any of those questions, so I answered them myself. That same morning, I had a conversation with my mother-in-law. I wasn't not unkind. I was not cold. I told her very directly that what she'd said the night before had hurt me, and that I needed her to understand this was my home, and I expected to be treated with basic respect inside it. She told me she hadn't meant any offense. I told her I believed she'd meant exactly what she said. I told her that in 1 month, I would need her to begin contributing to household expenses. I named a number, $500 a month, which was less than a third of what her pension covered and didn't touch the insurance money. I told her that if that wasn't possible, we'd need to talk about other arrangements. She looked at me for a very long time. Then she walked out of the kitchen. An hour later, my husband found me in the living room. He told me that I'd upset her. He told me that she'd come to him crying. He told me that she was family and I needed to understand that family was different. I asked him if I was family. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Because she's been living here for 14 months, I said, and you have consistently chosen to manage her feelings over mine. And I need to know if I'm family or if I'm just the person whose house this happens to be in. He said I was being unfair. I said I was being direct for the first time in over a year, and I needed him to sit with that for a moment before he decided it was the same thing as being unfair. I wasn't, to tell you that he was fine after that. That he heard me, that we came together, that everything got worked out with a real honest conversation. I want to tell you that because it would be a cleaner story. What actually happened was that it got harder before it got easier. My husband was angry with me for several days. His mother was cool and formal at meals. The house felt like a place where everyone was waiting for someone else to apologize first. My sister called me from back home and said quietly, "I'm really glad you said something. What she did was not okay." That meant a lot. More than I'd expected. What changed things wasn't one moment. It was a few of them. About 3 weeks after that dinner, I was working late on a Thursday when I got a call from my husband. He'd gone to pick something up from the dry cleaner and run into a neighbor, a woman who lived 2 streets over, who apparently had been chatting with my mother-in-law on her afternoon walks. According to this neighbor, my mother-in-law had described her living situation as staying with my son while his wife gets used to having a real family around. My husband was calling me from the dry cleaner parking lot. His voice was flat. I think hearing it from someone outside had done something to him that my saying it hadn't. When you love your mother, it's easy to reframe the things she does as complicated or misunderstood. It's much harder to reframe what a neighbor you barely know has just repeated back to you in a strip mall parking lot. He came home and he talked to her. I wasn't in the room. I don't know exactly what was said. But she was quiet that evening, and she apologized to me the next morning. Not a full apology, the kind that still has a but somewhere in the middle of it, but something. I took it as a starting point. Over the next 2 months, things shifted. My mother-in-law began contributing to expenses, not the $500 we discussed, but $300, and then in December, $400. My husband started being more present in conversations when she made comments, stepping in rather than looking away. It wasn't perfect. It still isn't. She has her own apartment now. She moved in February, about 7 months after that dinner. It's 15 minutes from us, which I think is actually better for everyone, including her. She has her own space, her own routines. We have dinner together on Sundays sometimes, and it's mostly fine. My husband and I are still working on things. There was a lot of weight underneath that one dinner, a lot of patterns we both let go on too long. He was too used to smoothing things over. I was too used to not saying them. Neither of those things serves a marriage. We've both had to learn that. What I want to say, if you're watching this and you're somewhere in the middle of a version of this story, still in the part where you're absorbing it, still telling yourself it isn't worth the conflict, still choosing everyone else's comfort over your own dignity in your own space, is that the patience you think is keeping the peace is sometimes just teaching people what you'll accept. I'm not saying blow it all up. I'm not saying what I did is the only way. But I am saying that the night I finally looked my husband in the eye across that kitchen table and asked him whether I was family, that was the first morning I woke up in my own house and actually felt like I lived there. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing, really. There's something nobody tells you about being patient for too long. It doesn't read as kindness to the people around you. It reads as permission. I think about that a lot now. 14 months of letting things slide. 14 months of telling myself she was grieving, he was stressed, the timing wasn't right, it wasn't worth the argument. I thought I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was drawing a map for everyone in that house that showed exactly how far they could go before I'd say a word. And they followed it right to the edge, because I'd never once given them a reason not to. That's not a criticism of who I am. I'm not sitting here wishing I'd been harder or colder or less willing to give people grace. Grace matters. But I've learned the difference between grace and erasure. Grace is choosing patience when you still have your dignity intact. Erasure is staying quiet so long that you start disappearing inside your own walls. The night my mother-in-law said what she said, that I had made myself comfortable, as though my own home were something I'd borrowed, I felt something go very still inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. The kind that comes when something you already knew finally stops pretending to be uncertain. What I did next wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cut off the contributions to hurt her. I asked for them because it was right. Because a grown woman with a pension and a savings account, living under someone else's roof, owes that household something, not as punishment, but as basic decency. Respect runs in both directions, and so does responsibility. When she stopped seeing me as someone worth respecting, she made a choice. I just finally made one back. My husband was the harder part. Because loving someone means you want to believe the best of them. And for a long time, I translated his silence as conflict avoidance, rather than what it actually was. A choice he was making every single time. He chose her comfort. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose it over and over again until the night the neighbor's parking lot stripped away every excuse he'd been carrying. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he'd spent 40 years watching his mother be the center of every room, and he didn't know how to be in one where she wasn't. That's something he's had to figure out, and watching him actually try, has meant something to me. What I know now is that the things I was most afraid to say were the exact things that needed saying. Not loudly, not cruelly, just clearly and without apology. The moment I asked him whether I was family, whether I actually counted inside this life we were supposed to be building, I stopped waiting for someone else to answer that question for me. I started answering it myself. That's the thing about finally using your voice after a long silence. It doesn't just change the conversation, it changes what you're willing to live without.